pleasant day to each and everyone. We are Group 6 and we're gonna be discussing about the North American literature. So for the introduction, here's the overview of the country North America. North America is one of the three continents along with South America and Oceania that make up the New World. The continents were new to the 15th century European explorers, but old to the indigenous people living there. Here's the overview of the North American literature. The literature in English of the British colonies of North America and after 1776 of the United States. The earliest colonial literature consisted mainly of religious and political tracts. The first notable poets were Anne Bradstreet (1612 to 1672) and Edward Taylor (1642 to 1729), both of Massachusetts. The intellectual dominance of New England was continued into the early 18th century by the theologian and metaphysician Jonathan Edwards (1703 to 1758). The period of the American Revolution was dominated by political writers such as Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Paine. Influential writers of the early 19th century included Washington Irving, James Fenimore Cooper, and Edgar Allan Poe. And American literature came to its full maturity in the works of New England writers Nathaniel Hawthorne, Ralph Waldo Emerson, and Herman Melville, the poets Walt Whitman and Emily Dickinson, and the humorist Mark Twain. Here's the literary genres of the North American literature. Number 1. Detective fiction. Genre of novel or short story in which a mystery is solved mainly by the action of a professional or amateur detective, where the mystery to be solved concerns a crime. The work may be called crime fiction. Number 2. Historical novel. A novel with a period in history as its setting, which includes historical events and characters. Number 3. Letters. In literature, written messages ranging from those addressed to the public and those sent from lover to lover to business letters and thank you notes. The common quality they share is a lively style, echoing the personality of the sender, yet aimed at the mind and heart of the receiver. Number 4. Mystery or mystery story. Literary genre in which the cause or causes of a mysterious happening, often a crime, is gradually revealed by the hero or heroine. Number 5. Novel. In modern literary usage, a sustained work of prose fiction, a volume or more in length. It is distinguished from the short story and the fictional sketch, which are necessarily brief. Number 6. Pastoral. Literary work in which the shepherd's life is presented in a conventionalized manner. In this conviction, the purity and simplicity of shepherd's life is contrasted with the corruption and artificiality of the court or the city. The pastoral is found in poetry, drama, and fiction and many subjects. Number 7. Romance. In literature, tales of love and chivalric adventure in verse or prose that became popular in France about 1200s and spread throughout Europe. And lastly, number 8, short story. Short work of prose fiction usually consisting of between 500 and 10,000 words, which typically either sets up and resolves a single narrative point of depicts a mood or an atmosphere. So one of the notable writers in the North American literature is Martin Luther King Jr. He was born in January 15, 1929 at Atlanta, Georgia, United States of America. Died on April 4, 1968 at the age of 39 in Memphis, Tennessee, United States of America. An American Baptist minister and activist who became the most visible spokesman and leader in the civil rights movement from 1955 until his assassination in 1968. an African-American church leader and the son of early civil rights activist and minister Martin Luther King Sr. Some of his writings are Though Dear God, Prayers That Open Hearts and Spirits 2011, A Gift of Love, Sermons from Strength to Love and Other Preachings 2012, All Labor Has Dignity 2010, The Radical King 2015, I Have a Dream 1963, A Testament of Hope 1986, Stride Toward Freedom, The Montgomery Story 1958, In a Single Garment to Destiny, A Global Vision of Justice 2012, A Time to Break Silence 2013, and Parting the Waters, America in the King Years 1954 to 1963, published on 1988. His focus topics are justice, freedom, equality, fairness, and creating what he called the beloved community. These principles can apply to societal challenges today. So why he is considered a notable writer? King was posthumously awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom in 1977 and the Congressional Gold Medal in 2003. The Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. was dedicated in 2011. Martin Luther King Jr. Day was established as a holiday in cities and states throughout the United States beginning in 1971. The holiday was enacted at the federal level by legislation signed by President Ronald Reagan in 1986.
So, Walt Whitman. Walt Whitman is the most significant American writers of the 19th century, and many critics considered him the nation's greatest poet. He was born on May 31, 1819. So, at the age of 12, Whitman began to learn the printer's trade and fell in love with the written word of Shakespeare and the Bible. His revolutionary poetry dealt with extremely private experiences, including sexuality, while celebrating the collective experience of an idealized democratic American life. So the things make him a great writer is he is considered the father of free verse. He introduced readers previously forbidden topics, sexuality, the human body and its function, and the incorporated unusual themes such as debris, straw, and leaves into his work. So, why he is considered a notable writer? So, he is one of the most influential writers on the 19th century, and his work is as important nowadays.
John Ernst Steinbeck Jr. was born on February 27, 1902, in Salinas, California. His father's name was John Ernst Steinbeck, and his mother was Olive Hamilton Steinbeck. He grew up with three sisters. Steinbeck decided to become a writer at the age of 14, often locking himself in his bedroom to write poems and stories. In 1919, Steinbeck enrolled at Stanford University. Over the next 6 years, he drifted in and out of school, eventually dropping out for good in 1925 without a degree. Steinbeck tried to make a go as a freelance writer. He briefly moved to New York City, where he found work as a construction worker and a newspaper reporter, but then returned to California, where he took a job as a caretaker in Lake Tahoe and began his writing career. Steinbeck wrote 31 books over the course of his career. His most well-known novels include Of Mice and Men on 1937, Grapes of Wrath on 1939, and East of Eden on 1952. In 1940, Steinbeck earned a Pulitzer Prize for The Grapes of Wrath. In 1962, the author received the Nobel Prize for Literature for his realistic and imaginative writings, combining a stay-to sympathetic humor and keen social perception. Upon receiving the award, Steinbeck said the writer's duty was dredging up to the light our dark and dangerous dreams for the purpose of improvement. During World War II, Steinbeck served as a war correspondent for the New York Herald Tribune. Around the same time, he traveled to Mexico to collect marine life with friend Edward F. Ricketts, a marine biologist. Their collaboration resulted in the book Sea of Cortez of 1941, which describes marine life in the Gulf of California. Steinbeck died of heart disease on December 20, 1968, at his home in New York City.
Good day, ma'am. My name is Bea, and I am going to discuss my chosen notable writers of North American literature. So I'll start with Emily Dickinson. Emily Elizabeth Dickinson was born on December 10, 1830 and died on May 15, 1886, at the age of 55 because of stroke. Her father was Mr. Edward Dickinson, who played an important role in town's political and business affairs, while her mother was Mrs. Emily Norcross Dickinson, who joined church when she was pregnant with Emily. So, what are the usual topics discussed by Emily Dickinson? Emily Dickinson was a keen observer, and she wrote everything about what she knows and what intrigued her. As a keen observer, she uses images from nature, religion, law, music, medicine, and fashion. But usually she always wrote about universal themes, wonder of nature, and the identity of self, and immortality and death, love, pain, and suffering. So these are some of the writings of Emily Dickinson, and as you can see, there are numbers decided on each poem because that is the number assigned by the posthumous editors. So why does Emily Dickinson considered as one of the notable writers? Emily Dickinson is a writer that used images from the universal themes, and she expressed her poem not as necessarily as the poet, but just like someone who expresses thought or feelings. Her special gift as a poet was her ability to describe the abstract concepts with concrete images. Her poems' abstract ideas was clearly explained.
Mark Twain, or Samuel Langhorne Clemens, known by his pen name Mark Twain, was an American writer, humorist, entrepreneur, publisher, and lecturer. He was born on November 30, 1835 in Florida, and Mark Twain was a talented writer, speaker, and humorist whose own personality shined his work. So, Mark Twain became a public figure and iconic American whose work represents some of the best in the genre of realism. So, his stories and novels are famous, their humor, vivid details, and memorable characters. His best-known works are The Adventure of Tom Sawyer and The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn, both classics in American literature. So, in his person and in his pursuits, he was a man of extraordinary contracts. So, the things that make him a great writer is his writing style is characterized by humor, strong narrative, and evocative descriptions, as well as brilliant control of vernacular speech. So, Mark Twain was a humorist, journalist, and novelist who became famous internationally for his distinctive style of travel and fictional narratives. So, why he is considered a notable writer? Twain's written works challenged the fundamental issues that face the America of his time, evolving landscape, class barriers, access to education, and more.
In 1918, Hemingway went overseas to serve in World War I as an ambulance driver in the Italian army. For his service, he was awarded the Italian Silver Medal of Bravery, but soon sustained injuries that landed him in a hospital in Milan. He met a nurse named Agnes von Kurowski who soon accepted his proposal of marriage, but later left him for another man. This devastated the young writer but provided fodder for his works, a very short story, and more famously a farewell to arms. In 1954, he won the Nobel Prize in Literature. Even at this peak of his literary career, the burly Hemingway's body and mind were beginning to betray him. Recovering from various old injuries in Cuba, Hemingway suffered from depression and was treated for numerous conditions such as high blood pressure and liver disease. He wrote A Movable Feast, a memoir of his years in Paris, and retired permanently to Idaho. There, he continued to battle with deteriorating mental and physical health. Early on the morning of July 2, 1961, Hemingway committed suicide in his Ketchum home. Hemingway left behind an impressive body of work and an iconic style that still influences writers today. His personality and constant pursuit of adventure loomed almost as large as his creative talent. Who was Ernest Hemingway? Ernest Hemingway served in World War I and worked in journalism before publishing a story collection titled In Our Time. He was renowned for novels like The Sun Also Rises, A Farewell to Arms, For Whom the Bell Tolls, and The Old Man and the Sea, which won the Pulitzer Prize in 1953. In 1954, Hemingway won the Nobel Prize. He committed suicide on July 2, 1961 in Ketchum, Idaho. His early life and career. Ernest Miller Hemingway was born on July 21, 1899 in Cicero, Illinois. Clarence and Grace Hemingway raised their son in this conservative suburb of Chicago, but the family also spent a great deal of time in northern Michigan where they had a cabin. In high school, Hemingway worked on his school newspaper, Trapeze and Tabula, writing primarily about sports. Immediately after graduation, the budding journalist went to work for the Kansas City Star, gaining experience that would later influence his distinctively stripped-down prose style. In Paris, Hemingway became a key part of what Gertrude Stein would famously call the Lost Generation. With Stein as his mentor, Hemingway made the acquaintance of many of the great writers and artists of his generation, such as F. Scott Fitzgerald, Ezra Pound, Pablo Picasso, and James Joyce. In 1925, joining a group of British-American expatriates, they took a trip to the festival that would later provide the basis of Hemingway's first novel, The Sun Also Rises. The novel is widely considered Hemingway's greatest work, artfully examining the post-war disillusionment of his generation. While reporting on the Spanish Civil War in 1937, Hemingway met a fellow war correspondent named Martha Gellhorn and gathered materials for his next novel, For Whom the Bell Tolls, which would eventually be nominated for the Pulitzer Prize. When the United States entered World War II in 1941, Hemingway served as a correspondent and was present at several of the war's key moments, including the D-Day landing. In 1951, Hemingway wrote The Old Man and the Sea, which would become perhaps his most famous book, finally winning him the Pulitzer Prize he had long been denied.
Henry Wadsworth Longfellow was a widely known American poet and the most beloved novelist of the 19th century. He was born on February 27, 1807 and died on March 24, 1882. He was the second child in a family of 8 children. Father, Mr. Stephen Longfellow, is a Harvard graduate and an attorney that is active in public affairs. And her mother, is Mrs. Delpa Wadsworth Longfellow, daughter of the General Peleg Wadsworth, who had served the American Revolution. Henry started schooling at the age of 3. So the usual topics discussed by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow was about nature, American history, hope, depression, and heroism. Henry's writings about nature present the relationship between the humanity and the nature world and the natural world. These are some of Henry's writings. Why does Longfellow recognized as one of the notable writers? Longfellow writings influenced the America's artistic and popular culture. He inspired many composers, and his poem was read and recited in schoolrooms and civic ceremonies up to this day, and he made a pioneering contributions to American history, American literary life, by exemplifying the possibility of a successful poetry by linking American poetry to European traditions beyond England and developed wide readership for Romantic poetry. Things allowed readers know their cultural identity and what their nation stood for, or the nationalism. He wrote about things that appeals to all kinds of people, and his poem was easily understood.
William Faulkner wrote numerous novels, screenplays, poems, and short stories. Today he is best remembered for his novels. Born in New Albany, Mississippi, on September 25, 1897. Associated with the Modernist and Southern Gothic literary movements. Kurt Vonnegut, born on November 11, 1922, Indianapolis. American writer noted for his realist satirical novels who frequently use postmodern techniques as well as elements of fantasy and science fiction to highlight the horrors and ironies of 20th century civilization.
Nathaniel Hawthorne is an American novelist, dark romantic, and short story writer who was master of the allegoric and symbolic tale. Nathaniel Hawthorne was born on July 4, 1804, in Salem, Massachusetts. When his father died, his uncle took him in. He helped him financially regarding Hawthorne's education. Hawthorne's first published work, Fosho, a tale based on his experiences at Bowdoin College. In 1821, he joined the Bowdoin College. During this period, he became friends with Franklin Pierce, H.W. Longfellow, and Horatio Bridge. He graduated in the year 1825. Hawthorne got married to Sophia Peabody on July 9, 1842, and lived in Massachusetts. He died on May 19, 1864 at the age of 59 in Plymouth, New Hampshire. His short stories includes My Kinsman's Major Molyneux of 1832, Roger Malvin's Burial of 1832, Young Goodman Brown of 1835, and the collection of Twice Told Tales of 1837. One of the greatest fiction writers in American literature, he is best known for The Scarlet Letter of 1850 and The House of the Seven Gables of 1851. Robert Frost was born on March 26, 1874 at San Francisco, California, U.S. and died on January 21, 1963 at Boston, Massachusetts. An American poet who was much admired for his depictions of the rural life of New England. Robert Frost was an American poet highly regarded for his realistic depictions of rural life and his command of American colloquial speech. His work frequently employed settings from rural life in New England in the early 20th century, using them to examine complex social and philosophical themes. One of the most popular and critically respected American poets of the 20th century. Frost is the only poet to receive 4 Pulitzer Prizes for poetry. He became one of America's rare public literacy figures, almost an artistic institution. He became one of America's most beloved poets. He was awarded the Congressional Gold Medal in 1960 for his poetic works. On July 22, 1961, Frost was named Poet Laureate of Vermont. Robert Frost's most famous poems includes The Gift Outright, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening, Birches, Mending Wall, The Road Not Taken, and The Nothing Gold Can Stay.
In his I Have a Dream speech, minister and civil rights activist Martin Luther King Jr. outlines the long history of racial injustice in America and encourages his audience to hold their country accountable to its own founding promises of freedom, justice, and equality. Here's the moral lesson of I Have a Dream speech by Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s speech, I Have a Dream, is arguably one of the most famous speeches in history. It has taught millions that dreams have the tremendous power to keep us alive and give us hope. And from King's own life, one can gain innumerable lessons on faith, patience, sacrifice, and belief. King was one of America's most influential civil rights activists. An orator par excellence, he managed to win the hearts of people, both black and white, and dedicated his life to achieving equality and justice for Americans of all color. He held many marches and speeches, gathering more and more people into his cause with each. Though he was often ridiculed and beaten, he never lost hope or gave up. King's determination and courage to stand up for what he believed are traits everyone must aspire towards. So why does the I Have a Dream speech by Martin Luther King Jr. became a masterpiece? Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech has had a lasting impact because of the rhetorical and literary devices within it. Analysts say the speech delivered 50 years ago on the steps of Lincoln Memorial reaches into both the intellect and emotions of Americans. The key message in the speech is that all people are created equal, and although not the case in America at that time, King felt it must be in the case for the future. He argued passionately and powerfully.
The Sound and the Fury, 1929 by William Faulkner. Before writing The Sound and the Fury, Faulkner found himself overly involved with the problem of selling his previous books to publishers. He decided to refocus his attention back on his writings so that he could create a finely crafted work. The result was The Sound and the Fury. Slaughterhouse-Five, 1969 by Kurt Vonnegut. The novel is the result what Vonnegut described as a 23-year struggle to write a book about firebombing of Dresden, Germany.
The Adventure of Tom Sawyer, 1876 by Mark Twain. A classic novel written by American novelist Mark Twain or Samuel Clemens, first published in 1876. So, the real Tom Sawyer was a heavy drinking firefighter and local hero whom Mark Twain befriended in the 1860s. The story is set in the fictional town of St. Petersburg, inspired by Hannibal, Missouri, where Twain lived. So Tom Sawyer lives with his Aunt Polly and his half-brother Sid. Song of Myself by Walt Whitman, 1855. This poem had no title in the first 1855 or edition of Libras. In 1856, it was called A Poem of Walt Whitman, an American. And in 1860, it was simply termed Walt Whitman. So Whitman changed the title to Song of Myself in 1881. The changes in the title are significant in indicating the growth of meaning of the poem. So to Whitman, the self is both individual and universal. Man has an individual self, whereas the world or cosmos has a universal or cosmic self. The poet wishes to maintain the identity of his individual self, and yet he desires to merge it with the universal self, which involves the identification of the poet self with mankind and the mythical union of the poet with God, the absolute self. So, the moral lesson of Song of Myself, 1855. Mark Whitman's purpose of writing this novel is so he can get the message of how society is hypocritical, has a lack of individualism and their way of religion. Song of Myself conveys how equality did not exist at that time, when there was still a distinction between the black and white.
The Old Man and the Sea is a novella written by the American author Ernest Hemingway in 1951 in Cuba, and it was published in 1952. It was the last major work of fiction written by Hemingway that was published during his lifetime. One of his most famous works, it tells the story of Santiago, an aging Cuban fisherman who struggles with a giant marlin far out in the Gulf Stream up the coast of Cuba. The Old Man and the Sea became a Book of the Month Club selection and made Hemingway a celebrity. In May 1953, the novel received the Pulitzer Prize and was specifically cited when in 1954 he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature, which he dedicated to the Cuban people. The success of The Old Man and the Sea made Hemingway an international celebrity. The Old Man and the Sea is taught at schools around the world and continues to earn foreign royalties. Of Mice and Men is a novella written by John Steinbeck. It was published in 1937. It narrates the experiences of George Milton and Lenny Small, two displaced migrant ranch workers who moved from place to place in California in search of new job opportunities during the Great Depression in the United States. Steinbeck based the novella on his own experiences working alongside migrant farm workers as a teenager in the 1910s. The title is taken from Robert Burns' poem To a Mouse. While it is a book taught in many schools, Of Mice and Men has been a frequent target of censors for vulgarity and what some consider offensive and racist language. Consequently, it appears on the American Library Association's list of the most challenged books of the 21st century. However, scholars including Thomas Scarset have fought to protect the book by arguing its literary value. According to Scarset, in true great literature, the pain of life is transmuted into the beauty of art.
I chosen literary pieces of the North American literature, so I'll start with The Telltale Heart. This story was written by Edgar Allan Poe in 1843, and it is all about the murderer who killed an old man because of his vultured eye. So, at the start of the story, the narrator or the murderer has an imaginary listener. He confessed that he is suffering from the illness, but he kept denying that he is insane. He said that his illness gave him more strength, especially to his sense of hearing. He was living with the old man who has a vultured eye, but he wanted to kill him not because of money or wealth, but it is because of the old man's vultured eye. Whenever he see the old man's vultured eye, he got angry at the old man. Before the crime happened, he followed the old man to his bedroom and watched him 7 nights. On the night of the murder, the murderer went again to the old man's room. He was laughing at his head because the old man didn't feel his presence. But The old man suddenly moved because he sensed something wrong. The murderer didn't feel afraid because he knew that the old man can see in the dark. Suddenly, the old man cried while sitting on his bed. So the murderer put lights on the old man and noticed that the old man's eyes made The murderer put lights on the old man and noticed that the old man's eyes that troubled him made him feel enraged. His sense of hearing heard the loud beating of the old man's heart. Every beat becomes louder for him and it increases his anger. He pulled the old man's bedsheet and put it on the old man's head. That suffocates the old man and make the heartbeat stop. The murderer sighed in relief because the old man's eyes will never trouble him again. After the murderer disjoint the old man's body parts, he hides all the pieces finished 4 a.m. in the morning. 3 policemen was knocking on the door. The police was called up by some neighbor after hearing the shriek of the old man. The policeman wants to investigate. The man told the policeman that the old man was shriek after having a nightmare. He even escorted them all over the house. They went to the old man's room and talking, but suddenly the murderer was hearing some noises which made him anxious. He thought that those noises was only in his head and he realized that it was from a room. He looked at the policeman, but they seemed not hearing the noise. He thinks that the policemen are laughing because of his stupidity. He cannot stand it anymore. The laughter and the noise mixed in his head him to confess his crime to the policeman. He told the policeman to uncover the flanks and they found out the mutilated body of the old man and his pumping heart. The moral lesson of the story is psychological health is important as our physical health. Mental illness can drive a person to do something dangerous activity without any motive. Why does it considered as a masterpiece? It focuses about the creation of monster that ultimately destroy its creation. So in the story, the murderer was the monster who wants to kill the victim because of his eye. He was the one who made himself a monster. And then later on, he was the one who destroyed himself by confessing his crime to the policeman. The author uses psychological fear instead of supernatural elements like witches or vampires. The poem of Psalm of Life. Psalm of Life was written by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow and published on 1838. On the first stanza, the poet are refusing to believe on all the negativity in life. He also denies that life is filled with misfortunes and meaningless dreams. And on the second stanza, conveys the essence of life, that life is real and not a hollow dream or illusion that should be wasted. The lines are showing the positivity of the poet. He also explained that the death is an inevitable destination and not a goal of life. The third stanza tells us how we should live our lives. We should improve our works in life that needs improvement, because this will help our future to be greater than yesterday and present. On the fourth stanza, the stanza discusses the importance of time. Our responsibility and our goals in life are increasing every day, but the time that we will be needing to achieve all of it decreases. He compared the beating heart at the ticking of the clock. He says that heartbeat is also like a ticking clock, a reminder of fleeting time we pass. In the fifth stanza, the poet referred the world as a battlefield. Life have so many serious situations. The readers was asked by the poet to be brave like a soldier who rises in the battlefield, be a hero on his own life. On the sixth stanza, the poet says, We should always work and deals with our present and future. The past will not be interfere our present and future. Past will be remained in the past and do not repeat what's on the past. On the 7th stanza, the poet are encouraging the readers to live their lives like what the heroes did. By doing that, they will make the next generation to remember them, just like the footprints on the sands of time. And on the 8th stanza, those footprints on the sands of time will be served as the inspiration of someone in the future. On the last stanza, the poet tells the readers to be prepared for whatever happened in the future. Be strong mentally and emotionally to embrace what life will throw at him so that he will be able to overcome it. The moral lesson of this poem is the purpose of our lives and to forget all the bad things happened in the past and live the present to the fullest and focus on our future. Why is it considered as a masterpiece? This poem gives an inspiration that was based on the Bible. It uses literary devices such as allusions for the indirect reference of a person, place, thing, or idea of his. It has assonance, imagery, personification, anaphora, consonance, paradox, parallelism, alliteration, and poetic devices.
The Road Not Taken is a narrative poem by Robert Frost, first published in the August 1950 issue of the Atlantic Monthly and later published as the first poem in the collection Mountain Interval of 1916. Frost himself wrote the poem as a joke for his friend Edward Thomas, who was often indecisive about which route to take when the two went walking. The moral lesson is that the decisions must be taken independently without fearing its consequences, as it is what makes all the difference. And take your own decisions without any regrets. It became a masterpiece because it is well known for its perceived encouragement to take the road less traveled by, allows the reader to think about choices in life. The Road Not Taken was originally published in the Atlantic in 1915 along with two other poems from Frost. It is now widely considered to be one of the most popular works of American literature. In The Scarlet Letter, the idea of sin and punishment is the main theme of the novel, and how Hester Prynne, the main character, has been punished for her sin of adultery. This book shows judgment, independency, and courage. The moral lesson of the story is that morality is not determined by society, and the seeking revenge harms you more than it does your enemy. And everyone commits sins in their life. However, one must always pay for what she done. It became a masterpiece because it is a classic moral study. It has strong themes of sin and guilt, and it is a societal critique. It was one of the first mass-produced books in America and sold 2,500 volumes within 10 days. Critics have described The Scarlet Letter was a masterwork, and novelist D.H. Lawrence called it is a perfect work of the American imagination.